Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. Today I want to go over the part 3 of the Path of Exile 3.16 Balance Manifesto, and this will contain auras, curses, and elemental damage over time. I think this is like the most interesting, for me at least, out of the three. So in the first video we went over the, the flasks and the ailments things. The second one was the defense and recovery, and now we're here on the big boy, I would say, because yeah, as I said, this is like the one that interests me the most. So I would say we're going to start right into the action. In our upcoming 3.16 expansion, we're making a number of balance changes. For the last 2 days, we talked about our plans for flask and ailment, blah 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 blah. We strongly recommend reading those. Yeah, we did that. We assembled this article as a set of identifying problems and our intended solutions. Below of each solution is a spoiler tag, which specifies of what we're currently intending to change. Please note, they probably going to change it whatsoever. So, support characters, auras, and other reservation effects. The problem. The reduced reservation stat provides very little benefit at low values, but becomes very powerful when heavily invested in. This allows players to run every aura in the game. It also forces reduced reservation to be balanced around extreme levels of investment, limiting how useful it can be to characters that do not run an enormous number of reservation skills. Finally, characters that heavily invested in reduced reservation in order to run more skills on mana were also able to reserve life extremely effectively, as well with no further investment, rendering this the only sensible way to play most heavily reservation-focused builds. True. Solution. Replace reservation reduction with reservation efficiency. When stacked, reservation efficiency does not allow for infinite auras. This can be given out much more liberally as a result, letting characters run additional reservation effects with only a couple of sources of reservation efficiency. The average character benefits, but the top end of extreme reservation has been made significantly weaker. So here I want to just mention one thing. When the first time I was playing an aura stacker, or the second time, I actually never realized that mana reservation, not like an enlightened support that gives like a negative multiplier to something, like 0.9 multiplier, for example, so it lowers the overall reservation. But if you have like flat mana reservation, let's say you have like 7% reduced mana reserved on your amulet, for example, right? This means that an aura that costs 50 will now cost 43. I never realized that this was actually a complete reduction. So at some part, when you stack like countless amounts of those things, like all the accessible variations of mana reservation, some auras were completely free because you had more mana reservation reduction than the aura would actually cost. So if you say you have 30% aura like reduced mana reservation, then every aura that is below 30% is 100% free, and all the others, the big boys like hatred and stuff like that, they cost like 20%, and this goes on even further and further and further, so that your 50% auras, basically like hatred, determination, all those kind of things, come down to a part where it just reserves like 6% or something. And this was the reason why aura stackers at extreme levels could get so many auras activated, because it's like a normal subtraction to the overall percentage reserved. So I'm not 100% sure yet what mana reservation efficiency does. We're probably going to learn that in a bit. But it should be like, if you have 100%, then a 50% aura will cost 25. But that will also mean that a 10% aura costs now 5, you know? So you would lose the option to reserve everything in the game. And this is a good point, I think. And also makes other characters with less investment use more auras on top. So let's see how this actually works out. Modifiers to reservation have been replaced with reservation efficiency. Reservation efficiency works by dividing the cost of the reservation effect. 100% increased reservation efficiency would have the cost of all auras. 50% reservation cuts down to enough to let you reserve an additional 50% reservation aura. Yeah, you can always run, like, probably I just have like a brain fart over here. Passive and item modifiers with reduced reservation have been replaced with increased mana reservation efficiency, generally at double the value of the previous reduced reservation value, but sometimes with different values for balance reasons. This means that a small amount of reservation investment is more impactful than before, while high investment doesn't allow as many auras to be used. The vast majority of reservation efficiency offered is now mana specific in order to prevent reserving both life and mana being the default choice for a build heavily invested in reservation. Generic reservation efficiency and life reservation efficiency are still available on some item modifiers. Dude, this is getting complicated. Like, even if I read through, I'm like, what? You know, so yeah, obviously, like, when you're playing a low life build, you know, and you use things like the prismatic, what was it, the shield, where you get like a big modifier on your mana reservation, and therefore you're gonna use that on life with blood magic, basically, right? Prison Guardian. That lets you reserve so many auras on both life and mana, and in the end you just throw on the shafts and just go for full energy shield, and you just have 2 mana pools basically to reserve auras, which is kind of ridiculous. And like every other character that's not doing it this way will have like a lot less auras and a lot less strength resulting, basically. If not mentioned below, all sources that previously provided reduced reservation, including for specific skills or type skills, now provide increased mana reservation efficiency at twice the value of the reduced reservation they used to give. Modifiers existing items are affected by these changes. Yeah, but I still don't understand the real reason. Is it the way that I just mentioned it above with like 100% efficiency would mean that a 50% aura costs now 25%? But that wouldn't really... Yeah, well, let's say you have 2 50% auras, let's call it like hatred and anger. Then you have no mana to cast things. If you have a 10% efficiency, you would get down to 45%, times 2 is 90%, so you still would be able, with the like least amount of mana efficiency, to still be able to cast spells while having 2 big auras active. So, but yeah, let's read through them. Notable passive skills grant by cluster jewels that previously granted reduced reservation of a specific aura now grant 60% increased mana reservation efficiency of that skill for auras that have 50% base reservation, and 100% increased mana reservation efficiency of that skill for auras that have 35% base reservation. So 50% base reservation for skills that have 60% efficiency for 50% and 100% efficiency for 35. So in the greater outcome, this is like skill specific, so you would still be able to get some auras like extremely cheap if you focus on that. The Hierophant Sanctuary of Thought notable passive skill now provides 25% increased mana recovery reservation efficiency instead of 10% less mana reservation. Is this the same? Probably at early stages, but definitely not in the stacking version. Helmet enchantments that previously granted reduced reservation of specific skills now grant the following values: increased mana reservation efficiency for that skill. Enchantments for skills that have 50% base reservation now grant 20 to 30% increased mana reservation efficiency for Merciless Eternal Labyrinth, respectively. Okay. So, yeah, this is like all things that sounds interesting, but to be honest, like, without seeing a proper example of this, how it will actually affect how much percent we still have to reserve in our mana, it's still like just theory, right? So I kind of get the idea. I hope you guys have a better understanding of what we just went through, but for me, I'm a person, I need to test things to see the actual outcome, you know? You know, for example, if somebody says, don't touch this, it's hot, then I still want to touch it because I want to see if it's actually just warm or is it like burning hot, you know? So, no, I haven't burned my fingers, by the way. It just was an example. The corrupted implicit modifiers on jewels that previously provided 1% reduced mana reservation now provides 2% increased reservation efficiency, not specific to mana. So we have to like divide that by 2. There is some parts that are for life and some parts that are for mana, because life obviously important for builds like the Juggernaut that I recently played with the Bloodthirst support, which gives you like damage based on how much life you basically reserved, or how much you have left. Skyforce now grants 12% increased reservation efficiency. So basically all these kind of items, I don't think we really have to go through those, because the reason that I just said, I think this just needs to be tested once we have the activated, or at least the updated path of building, so we can like import older characters and then see after we updated them to the current new state of mana reservation efficiency, do we have now more mana available or do we have less mana? Can I still reserve my 6 auras that I had on like certain melee builds, basically, because you have like Blood and Sand, Flesh and Stone, you have like Herald of Purity, you have like Pride, Precision, and all these kind of things. It used to work like that with like Enlightens, sometimes even a double Enlighten setup, maybe even a mana reservation, maybe an influenced amulet that makes it possible. But the question is, will it still be possible? How many auras should a character have? You know, what is like too much auras? What is too low auras, basically, right? Good. Then I would say let's keep all of that just so we basically gonna see it later on. Characters specialized in maximizing the power of auras provide an absolutely insane amount of damage and defense to party members, making a party with an aura specialized character so much more effective than one without. Yeah, obviously, that's why group fighting is actually a thing, because aura bots basically make the main DPS like 10 times stronger instead of like giving some buffs. Remove sources of aura effect from cluster jewels and move the aura cluster jewels type to small cluster jewels, so it's no longer possible to continuously stack aura effect for your party. Introduce a new cluster jewel notable to increase the effect of your auras on you for builds that are building around auras for their power. Yeah, that basically cancels aura bots, but I was actually hoping to see a direct nerf to aura stackers as well. I mean, this is basically, if they cannot run 20 auras anymore, they're gonna be weaker anyways, because the more auras an aura stacker has, the more attack speed, the more cast speed, the more physical damage mitigation, like, it all plays together. That's why an aura stacker on a low budget is actually very bad, you know, and one that has like high investment, like mirror tier wise, they are like so absurd strong, and it all is about like how many auras. Do I need Grace? Probably not, but it's one more aura, so I want to have it, basically, right? So basically, this would probably kill the amount of auras. I just was... I mean, aura effect makes sense, you know, for builds that actually use them the way they should be. For example, I have a physical build that is like converting into cold. So I want to have a hatred because it gives physicals extra cold, which directly benefits my character. And increasing the aura effect makes the physicals extra cold value just a lot higher. So it's just a POB thing. If you can see, like, is it worth for me to stack aura effect, or should I get other sources of damage to underline basically once it's done what is being better? So the aura cluster jewel type can now be found on the small cluster jewels rather than medium cluster jewels. Cluster notable passive skills have an aura effect removed. The increased aura effect of auras on you from Purposeful Harbinger, notable, blah, 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 only applies to your own aura effects. Yeah, that still is for Aura Stacker. The Master of Command Cluster Jewel now grants 10% increased effect of non-cursed auras from your skills. Previously was 15, so yeah, the thing is that we kind of have to understand, or at least if you are new to aura stacking, basically you have breakpoints to reach, you know? For example, 300%, 400%, 500%. Like in the old versions of Aura Stacker, people could reach over 500% Aura effect. After nerfs, after changes and stuff, it was like hard to reach 400%. You had to like get like timeless jewels with like very good timeless jewels with like more and more aura effects, so you could surpass that 400%. That gives you extra maximum resistance. That gives you the extra physical damage reduction, right? But with more nerfs, if you would say only mirror tier characters would actually reach the 400%, would you like to play an Aura Stacker that cannot get to 400%, so you're somewhere like 300, maybe 350? Yeah, it would probably still be playable, at least like for normal content, right? But the thing is, what has to change is like this immense power that Aura Stackers have to just blindly run through the content, because they are the most tankiest characters this game has ever seen. Plus, they also have access to the highest damage available in this entire game. Like, an Aura Stacker, based on the budget basically, has so much damage, then it outshines like 95% of every other build, unless you build like an Extreme Glass Cannon or something. And I think, because I always explain the thing like the bar, right? If I want to have damage, I lose defenses. If I want to have a more tanky character, I'm going to lose damage. But what an Aura Stacker does, I'm going to get way more tanky, but therefore I'm also going to get way more damage. It's just like unfair to every normal build. So, Cluster Jewel, notable passive that grant reduced reservation specific to auras, now grant high amounts of reservation efficiency. As I said, we need to check how that actually works out. Effect of your curses. Yeah, some nerfs. So, support characters' curses. So this is basically dealing with the curse bots now. Characters specialized in maximizing the number of power of curses provide far too much damage and defense for party members, making a party with a curse specialized character so much more effective than one without. Solution: make curse cluster jewels a small cluster jewel. So basically the same as on the aura bot, pretty much the same nerfs here to the curse bot. Wasn't there like a third, like mana guardian or something that also was like giving tremendous amounts of power or survivability? Greatly improve a regular character wanting to maximize your curses of choice, making significant changes to the other's skin as it applies many curses at almost no cost. So curse cluster jewels. I'm not sure if we. It's gonna be another like 40 minutes video. I'm sorry about that, but there's like so much information, and I basically try to understand and review my point of view when I read through this. So, to make jewels more useful for characters using only 1 or 2 curses, we've greatly improved the cluster jewel notables, granting benefits to specific curses, as well as added new ones. However, they can no longer be found on cluster jewels than other curse types. It's like a little bit hard for me because, yes, I did play an aura stacker, so I have some form of clue. I would not say that I'm an aura stacker main, so I maybe still get things wrong. But I never played an aura bot, neither did I ever play a curse bot, because I'm just not enjoying party play, and I think party play is way too powerful. I mean, there is big parties, like big streamers, they're always like a league starting with a group. You know, they have like a complete different setup. They have their curse bot, their aura bot, their mana guardian or whatever. They have their DPS, their trader. Like, they can make so much more currency. Obviously, they're gonna divide everything by 5 in the best case scenario, right? But they can make so much more currency unless you're Path of Math and just can print currency out of nowhere, basically, right? But for the average player, it's like just unfair for people that just not have access to friends that want to play with them in PoE. That. So there's a list of cluster jewel notables that have changed. As I said, as a non-curse bot player, as a non-aura bot player, I have a hard time getting through that, but I guess if you are a curse bot player, then you probably find this information like a lot more valuable. But I just read through the small things that we read that it's basically the same. What changes to aura stacking it will be just applied to curses, making them weaker, nerfing them, as well with like the mana reservation efficiency now maybe not be able to run like so many forms of curses and stuff. The Dredger skin is something that I've never touched either. Let me quickly actually Dredger's skin. It was something with like aura, with like curses. Socket gems are supported by level 20 blasphemy, which means you can turn these gems on as an aura for curses, basically. Grants level 20 summon Dredger's effigy skill. X curses skills are triggered by this thing when summoned. Ignore curse limit. This is like probably the most impactful one, because the thing is like, every character can have 1 curse, unless you're gonna scale things like having the getting more maximum curses. So technically, you could run 10 curses, but only will count 1. It's always the most recent one cast that it will override the old one. So the curse limit is the point where things gets like wild. So instead of like ignore curse limit, they could just be like, you can have 2 additional curses or something to just straight up nerf the chest itself if it's like way too powerful. But yeah, now I see that this is like the fact that makes it like ridiculous. Can apply 5 additional curses. Yo, dude, just what I said. All right. Still 5 curses plus the ones you have available on the tree, on the gear. The boots give you +1, like. I think like the gloves, the Vixen gloves gives you +1, so you could still run a tremendous amount of additional curses. But the thing is like, how much can you run effectively? Because you still have to deal now with the mana efficiency, right? Mana uniques have been rebalanced. The replica Dredger's damning. There was the ring. Yeah. Elemental damage over time. This is something I have definitely more more experience, I guess. It's like, you have to understand, I don't want to burn my fingers with providing false information, because if you watch my streams or my build reviews and stuff like that, you know, when people ask me about build ideas for, or at least like, yo, can you check out my POB? I open the POB and this is a character, a miner, a summoner, something that I barely ever play. So I just lack the experience on those characters to give a good input. And that's why I also say I'm lacking the information about curses, curse bots and aura bots. So it's like hard to replicate, like, what will this mean for the greater good. But what I read here over is curse bot nerfs, aura bot nerfs, aura stacker nerfs. I welcome all of those changes. I don't want to like celebrate that group players now have a harder time getting going, right? It's not like that. But I just think that there is just, I think it's more or less abusing group play, because it's just way too efficient to not do it, more or less, right? Or less efficient if you don't do it. Elemental damage over time. The elemental damage over time effects of cold damage over time, burning, and ignite are too dependent on elemental overload. True. And elemental equilibrium. True. Ignites are too dependent on ignite damage multiplier on skills, making skills without ignite multipliers too weak to use ignite with. So this is one of the big issues that I encountered last league, because in the past, medium cluster jewels, for example, had as an implicit fire dot multi. There was a lot of like cluster jewel nodes that gave you fire dot multi, because it's your best source of increased damage for your ignites. And when I read through the changes of last league, especially since a lot of people played like Burning Arrow, or my favorite, which is like the Herald of Thunder Ignite Auto Bomber, basically. The thing is, like, after I saw that they removed all sources, or the most sources, of fire dot multi, I kind of knew that the damage is going to suck, because I have played Ignites builds in the past, and there's always like this, how you say, the big increase of damage once you have access to Cluster Jewel. Let's assume your character has like 1 million 1 million DPS Ignite, right? You add your first big cluster, a large cluster jewel, 2 mediums, with all the fire dot multi, the burning bright cluster jewel that was like the best one that you want to stack like 5, 6, 7 times if possible, because of the increased fire damage, the fire dot multi, the AoE and stuff like that. And you really felt this increase of power once you added your first set of cluster. Then later levels, more currency farmed, you add your second one, and the difference, the damage difference from like having no cluster jewels to having 2 sets of cluster jewels was like, you probably were 5 times stronger after you added those, right? So without having access to the cluster jewels, without having access to that power of fire dot multi, I don't know if I want to play an ignite build, you know? And that was like the big problem that we had last league with removing all the fire dot multi. And I did try fire burst, and it had like maybe 25% damage of what we had in the past. So I was like, you know what? No thanks, you know? And the same is like with the X Blast Ignite that I really enjoyed playing, but it also relied on Elemental Overload and Elemental Equilibrium to actually make quite nice ignites, you know? So why, for me as a damage over time player like Essence Drain Contagion or Cold Dot or Fire Dot, why do I have to rely on a crit mechanic to actually deal damage? So I really enjoy the fact that they are working on things like that. So, solution: greatly improve the base strength of Ignite, Burning, and Cold damage over time, while making Elemental Overload and Elemental Equilibrium less powerful or require more investment with damage over time skills. Rebalance skills that could apply Ignite effects around the new base damage of Ignite, and remove Ignite damage multipliers. Okay, yeah, but if the outcome is the same, I'm fine with that. If they buffing the base damage and lowering the damage over time multiplier, if under, like, at the end of the day, we're gonna have more damage out of Ignites with less investment, without sticking into crit and stuff like that, I see that as a good change, to be honest. Because then I don't rely on like cluster jewels, as I explained before, to make a character deal a good amount of damage, but I have the option to do so if I want to make it even more powerful. Something like that. The thing though is, with LE Overload and Elemental Equilibrium, less powerful or require more investment with damage over time skills. The thing is, like, what does Elemental Overload in the general reason do? It gives non-crit build access to more damage, because we know if you compare like a Slayer Cycloner, for example, with the Keystone Resolute technique, you know, you will never crit, but you're always gonna hit. So compare this one to a crit-based version, which needs a lot more investment because you need to take care of your accuracy, your critical strike chance, your critical damage multiplier, and stuff like that, right? So the crit version is always like can scale so much stronger. Like Resolute technique is early on, is league starter stuff. You know, it doesn't need a lot of like investment to be good. But a crit build will always outshine the non-crit builds. And Ally Overload was something like basically what Resolute technique is for melee builds, like a straight up boost, because I don't have to worry about accuracy. I can go for more flat physical damage and more percent physical damage and whatnot. And the thing is, like, Ally Overload was kind of the same. If I don't have the big currency, I play non-crit builds that have access to more power, you know? But in the other hand, like a pure crit build will still outshine in a lot higher investment. So let's see. Player Ignite now has deals 150% more damage than before. Previously 50% of base damage over 4 seconds. Now it's 125 base damage over 4 seconds. So the base damage is like, yeah, almost 2.5 times higher. Cold damage over time scales now deal more damage. Creeping Frost, base damage almost doubled in base damage. Yeah, but you still think like Ignite and dot builds got hit like a truck last league, and I would like basically from the bit of experience that I had last league while playing dot builds, I was like not recommended at all. So yeah, these buffs, these changes sound like holy shit, that's gonna be meta again. But don't forget, we still don't have access anymore to the fire.multi sources that we had in the past. So the higher base damage probably brings it down to a better state, so it's still playable and recommendable, rather than being like, you know what, if you want to play dot builds, then visit a Path of Exile private server that has all the good old stuff to make it actually good, right? Added cold snap damage over time numbers. Burning skills now deal more damage. Added cold snap damage over time numbers. I never play cold snap, or not like that I remember it, so I cannot really do something with that. Infernal Legion support, blah blah blah. Flame Wall has now more damage. Fire Trap, Val Righteous Fire. Righteous Fire is going to be interesting. Scorching Ray, Searing Bond. Searing Bond. Yo, that gives me flashbacks to my totem build. Many skills that had an Ignite multiplier have had that multiplier removed. The skill have been balanced to compensate for this. If necessary, certain skills have been rebalanced due to the change to base Ignite damage, taking into account whether they are able to take full advantage of Elemental Overload now. Note that examples below do not include the effect of Elemental Overload or Elemental Equilibrium, hence why the Ignite value is much higher for many other skills. Discharge Flame Loss. Like, I am a big fan of Ignite. I'm actually a big fan of damage over time. I always compare those, like, what do they give me? We have, like, Bleed, we have Cold Dot, we have Ignite, we have Chaos Dot, right? Two of them are ailments, but the thing is, like, well, it's elemental ailments. Bleed has the problem that it doesn't self-spread. That's why I like Poison, because Poison can stack endlessly and also can spread. While Bleed can, I mean, with the Crimson Dance, you can stack up to 8 Bleeds, which is nice for single target. But what I miss is the speed in Bleed, right? And Ignite has like, is a mix in between, which has like 1 stack, but it can spread, right? And doing that with explosions and having like chain reactions, these kind of things like Herald of Ash and whatnot, that makes, for me, Ignite the winner out of those 3, even though I think that Poison has the biggest, how you say, investment curve, where you can say, like, Poison is something I can scale endlessly, because attack speed will actually increase my damage, because I can apply more poisons in a shorter amount of time, while I can still, like, get, like, all other sources with, like, poison or, like, all these, like, damage effects, deal damage faster and whatnot, but I always think, like, that Bleed is, like, the big down point. I cannot stack it endlessly, and it doesn't spread, which makes the other ones, in my opinion, just way more enjoyable to build around. Yeah, I think I don't have to go through all of the changes. Like, I think if you have, like, a thing like... Oh, wait, Fire Burst, since I now see it. That's, like, interesting. Now deals at level 20, previously 1600. Wait, didn't it? Okay. So they nerfed the base damage again. They remove. Wait a second. This is cool. Now has a 1 second cooldown instead of 1.5. So we're getting back to the old fire burst. And ignite damage changes. Ignite the skill now is 67. So it will not be as strong as it was when we first find out about the build and how insane it was. It was like definitely meta. Now we basically gotta destroy the skill to like 20% base damage compared to the old version. Now it's 67% higher, which means we're getting more towards like half as good, or maybe a bit more than half as good as it used to be, which is still like back in the days when Fire Burst was the first time the thing. It was ridiculous, like really ridiculous. So I think this looks actually workable with. So we could definitely see like Fire Burst builds again. Maybe even as a league starter, because I always said Fire Burst is insane league starter just because you do not need a 6-link. All you need is the essence, and that's about it. And you're gonna have like very good amounts of damage now based on the ignite changes. So this is definitely something to consider. So the Elemental Overlord Keystone passive skill now gives more hit and ailment damage to skills if they crit in the last 8 seconds. If they crit the skill itself, this means that you can't use a secondary rapidly hitting skill, making a small amount of critical chance investment much more important. So what that means, I need to crit with Fire Burst and not having like, you know what, I'm gonna run an Orb of Storms or a Stormbrand with increased critical strike chance to actually just use this one to trigger the Ally Overload, because the buff will actually benefit the skill that I actually want to use. Now you actually have to crit with this skill. So something like Fire Burst in that regard, I don't think will be valuable, because don't forget, Fire Burst has a 1 second internal cooldown. And if you run, let's say, 10% crit, then the average of getting Elemental Overload is 10 seconds, because every second, if there is monsters there, it will hit. And there is a chance 1 in 10 that it will crit to give you actually the buff. So that's actually interesting. So it will just be harder to accessible on dot builds, more or less. Yeah, that would make sense then that Cold Snap has now... Wait, does it have a base damage? So can you crit with it? I'm not sure. The Elemental Equilibrium Keystone passive now applies 25% exposure of the element with hit, removing exposure to the lines you hit with. It's now easy way to apply a strong exposure effect rather than a huge damage boost that we balance elemental damage over time skills around. Like, the thing, like, how Elemental Equilibrium works is like, I hit something with lightning damage and they get increased lightning resistance, but they lose cold and fire. So what is nice with like Hex Blast, for example, if you have chaos and let's say lightning damage, like Archmage Hex Blast, for example, gives you tremendous amounts of lightning damage. So you hit with your Hex Blast, inflict an ignite through the Stormfire Ring, so it will burn for fire damage, but you hit it with lightning damage. So what will happen is the monster will get increased lightning damage that you don't care about, because your actual damage source is fire damage, and they're gonna lose a bunch of fire resistance. I think that 50% or something like that. So you just basically abuse to play around with the elements to like tremendously buff it, you know? So just giving it a flat exposure for a damage increase. How are you gonna trigger it, actually? Oh, so it's basically the same. They just reverted that. So I hit with lightning, and they're gonna get fire and cold exposure instead, with a instead of negative resistance. So this is interesting. We're gonna see in the POV how it's gonna turn out. If it's like way more powerful than before or a weaker version, is it still worth to taking it, right? But the base idea on how the skill works is still the same. I hit with lightning, and they're gonna have like, they are more vulnerable to fire and cold. We'll be looking at pure elemental minions to determine which changes are needed here. Yeah, I guess. Move the Elemental Equilibrium Keystone passive to the Ranger section of the passive skill tree, where there is much less existing access to exposure for elemental builds and access to skills that rotate elements, such as Wild Strike. This is interesting, because the... Let me just open POV so you get an idea. Because the Elemental Equilibrium is over here, so it's more like accessible to like one of the top starting areas, especially Witch, but the Elementalist has already a good amount of sources. But for a duelist, for example, traveling all the way up here to get the elemental equilibrium. I've seen it in a couple of builds, especially when they're like elemental based. That let's assume you are a duelist, that you would get down here basically your typical nodes, right? We quickly replicate the tree like that, getting the life nodes, and then you would basically get over here, take all these nodes up here until elemental Overload and elemental equilibrium if you want to play that. For example, the Hex Blast champion that I played with Fortify and these kind of things, right? This had like a tree looking like that, just so we have access to both of them for the extra damage boost. More scaling options have been added to damage over time builds on the passive skill tree, and items raising the top of the end damage over time for well-geared characters. There are now 5 tiers of the global damage over time multiplier suffix modifier that rolls in a weapon, going up to 26% on one-handed weapons and 45 on two-handed weapons. There are now 5 tiers of global damage over time multiplier suffix modifier, blah, 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 amulets, okay. Influence modifiers on rings that had a chance to ignite freeze, as well as some flat damage, have been changed, okay. They no longer provide a chance to apply the element, but they provide a lot more added damage instead. The fire version rolls up to fire damage against ignited enemies. Like, most accessible here is like the Ice Nova builds, like Cast and Crit, for example. They always had those freeze skills because it's extra damage, but there is also stats on gloves that have the same effect. Fire Cold, Physical, Chaos Damage over time modifiers and jewels have now 6 to 8, previously 3 to 4. So that's like a double value on like rare jewels. That's pretty big. Because like the thing is, yeah, we lost the damage over time multiplier effect on our cluster jewels, but the new access that I saw was like adding a lot of rare jewels instead to give you like live fire.multi or chaos.multi, whatever you're gonna build, and now it's gonna be 8% or 6 to 8% instead. So you're gonna have twice as much. So I think rare jewels will now be the way to go to boost your damage. All jewels can now roll a faster damage of ailments prefix modifier. That is big, man. So what is like your perfect jewel then? You have prefix, life, and faster damage, and suffix would be fire.multi and then like increased burning damage or something, like triple damage life. That's gonna be insane if you roll that. Gonna buy a lot of Scorched Fossil if you go to Fire Route. A higher base value of like the influenced items on gloves, for example. The T1 is now 16 to 20. So straight above there as well. Emberwake added a bit too much damage and crowded. Yeah, that's pretty much true because all the good Ignite builds had like Emberwake and Replica Emberwake in combination. It also gotten weaker over the time due to us adding more source of faster Ignite damage. No longer has ignited enemies burn slower and now has 40% less burning damage. So what I see here, I'm looking more and more towards an Ignite build as my League starter. Fireburst got buffed again. The base damage is insanely high now for a lot of like these Ignite-based versions if you play that, and you have now access to a lot more dot multi. The one that I, as a, like say again, from the previous, what made Ignite builds insanely strong, it was cluster jewels. The immense amount of fire dot multi that you had access to. They removed that, so now it kind of sucks. But now adding shit tons of damaging ailments deal damage faster and the fire.multi or other source. I'm just gonna explain it in the fire.multi way, in the Ignite way, because that's the way I would personally go. But it definitely will counter like SS Drain Contagion as well, for example, because it should be like here, Fire Cold, Physical, and Chaos Dot. So it will benefit Bleed builds. It will benefit any kind of like damage over time build, whether it's Bleed, Ignite, or Chaos builds, Poison, for example. So, problem. Burning Arrow is too complex for level 1 skill. I have no idea. Redesign the skill without a secondary stacking burning effect, but with high added fire damage against ignited enemies. I guess that's fine. Problem. Ignite builds don't have a way to focus their damage on bosses, forcing balance to be the same for clear speed and the boss damage solution. Change Flame Surge and introduce a new attack-based mechanic to be able to deal much more burning damage to a target enemy. That is nice. That is actually nice, so you can focus more, because the thing is, like, let's say I have I think it was Fan the Flames, or your elementalist. So you get the ailment spread basically, right? So if your fire burst says you have 5 million shaper DPS, right? You're gonna have 5 mil DPS in your ailment spread clearing entire screens, right? But on a Cyrus fight, you still only gonna have 5 million DPS single target. So if they're gonna make mechanics that you can, for example, let's assume a mark, for example, right? A fire mark, and if this is one on an enemy, it can get up to like 5 ignite stacks, which will be like freaking 25 million DPS instead of 5, but only for this one specific target. If this is something they're gonna look into, that's actually interesting. Flame Surge is getting a new burning ground mechanic that deals damage based on ignites on the target. That's pretty cool. We're investigating a similar mechanic for attacks. So it's basically a debuff that I lay on the floor, and if the monster stands in there, they're gonna have like a lot higher burning damage received. Yeah, I mean, that's totally fine with me. I want to stress that the above list and posts from the last 2 days aren't final. There are plenty of other balanced topics that we plan to cover in 3.16 announcement and patch notes. Thanks for reading through the end, and please let us know your feedback on these changes and this new approach to communication. Well, first of all, I really like the thing where they say, like, you know, what is the problem and what is our solution for that. But I personally think there is probably a lot more problems that are listed over here, you know. But I really like the approach that they're gonna just say, like, okay, we would be technically sitting next to them while they are discussing, yo, what's up with the future of PoE, right? What is our problem and how are we gonna fix that? And I really like the approach that they share what they decided to do against it, and not just give us, like, for example, problem, Fireburst is way too strong. Solution, let's just nerf everything. You know, what do we know? Patch notes hit, Fireburst nerf to the ground, but we don't really can follow, like, yo, why actually did you reduce the base damage and the effectiveness and give it a higher cooldown and removing fire.multi and removing all more sources of damage? So now the skill, instead of like getting tuned from 100% damage, now it's like 75%, and see how it goes. Why did we actually change it from 100% to 20%, which makes the skill almost unplayable, right? So the approach that they're gonna list the problems and talk about it, what are the changes and what do they want to change, or why, and reasons for that. I really like this approach, to be honest. But overall, I'm really excited now, even more on the new 3.16. But as far as I see here, if this is gonna work out the way I think, we're gonna have shit tons of dot builds, and if those things like this burning ground, so enemies on that floor will get like tremendous amounts of more damage, you know, that could probably outshine any melee build again. I mean, melee builds aren't in the best spot anyways as of right now, and things like that. I'm not sure. Maybe there's going to be more changes towards melee characters as well, because I think the last time melee characters got some love was in 3.7 Legion League, which is like, yo, a couple of years already ago, right? And yeah, caster builds are once again taking over once again, and yeah, based on that, I'm also interested how this will affect Spellslinger builds. Can I run now with a mana reservation efficiency? Am I able to run multiple Spellslinger setups again? So at the moment, I think Spellslinger and Ignite or Dot builds gonna be the flavor of the month, and all the rest will be, I guess, we're gonna see. That's my point of view at this point. But yet again, I still like the changes to the curse bots and aura bots. Not because I hate them, but I just think people that are not able to play with a group or don't have friends and traders and whatnot, they just not should be suffering for not being that effective at all. And making a character like 20 times stronger with adding an aura bot is just not the way it should be, in my opinion. But anyways, guys, let me think in the comments what you think about those changes, maybe some league start predictions. And yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.